Everyone says trust the universe, but what does that actually look like when life falls apart? I'll tell you what, we're going to try to answer part of that question with today's podcast. Welcome to Mystical Journeys with Jase. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mystical Journeys with Jase. I hope you've been enjoying the podcast. Today, we're going to get into a tougher question, but one that really is asked often by anybody, especially people who are following their spiritual path. I've run into this question from people where they've been really having a tough time in their lives and they're not sure what direction to go or what they need to do or what the next step of what they should be moving forward towards. Or maybe that they've gotten to a point where they just can't really even move at all. I have to say that pretty much everybody I've met has had those moments where life has just gotten so hard for them that you're not even sure if you can take the next step forward. So let's talk a little bit about that today. Let me go back in time. I remember several times in my life where just things just had gotten impossibly hard. Things were not working great on the relationship front. Things weren't working well with my kids. At one point, I was unemployed, actually, several points, but who's counting? And there were those times where you're just kind of sitting there, and that's a very hard space to be in. You're afraid to talk to anybody about anything. You're also afraid that even if you talk to somebody about something that's, what's going to happen? They're going to judge you. And that actually makes it a lot worse for you. So you end up sitting in that darkness of your own soul. And in that darkness, you really feel like there's no way out. Now, what I'm going to say is there are things to remind you of that when you're in that darkness, no amount of advice, no amount of encouragement, no amount of anything is really going to help you just kind of push through all that. But what I can say is that a couple things to keep in mind. Let me start off with a little story. There's a meditation group that I've been a part of at one point. I really enjoyed spending some time with these people. It was just a simple meditation. I didn't really have to get really all that complicated. I didn't have to teach. That was really nice. And the people went around the room at one point, and the subject we were talking about is about feeling bad and how we dealt with it. And each person talked about how they had had times where they felt really bad and things like that. After that, though, there was a guy that was leading the meditation, and he said, "Okay, all right, so let's talk about what have you done to get yourself out of that darkness?" Now, that's something to ponder. Each person had given different things they had done. Some people decided just to go for a walk. Some people said, one of the best things I could do was just play with my cats. Another person mentioned they go visit a good friend and things like that. And I thought, you know what? That's really good. There was this one guy, and I have to say, when I was at that meditation, I got to admit, I really didn't like this guy. He was very negative, very hard kind of guy to deal with. But I got to admit, sometimes in the darkness, you get some really good and incredible wisdom. But on this one occasion, he decided to answer this question. And one of the things that he had said to himself, he said, you know, because when life's been really bad for me, I try to remind myself that there's somebody else out there that has it a lot worse than I do. And he said, I think about them for a little bit and I actually start to feel a little bit better. You know, When I heard that, my first thought was, that's pretty freaking selfish, kind of thing to say. But then, of course, it had to hang with me for a bit. So for the next day or two, I started to think about how many times in the world that there are people who just wish that they had my problems. And how many times in the world that there are people that just wish they could have just had one thing slightly better in their life, just a little bit. I think that as Americans, one thing we forget is a great majority of the world definitely doesn't have things as good as we have it. And yes, I do mean that. Because over here, for the most part, you can always find something to eat. Over here, you can generally find clean water and drinkable water. And as you're going along, where you can go, you can actually get a chance to talk to people and actually maybe get some advice. But at least you can get some advice. Anyhow, let's keep on going here. So when you're walking along and you're in that place of just absolute darkness, the one thing I'd like to ask yourself is, what can I do in this moment to just hang on? Now, I think I remember correctly. I think it's Franklin Roosevelt who said, when you're at the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. Now, think about that for a second. Tie a knot and hang on means just make your efforts to hang on. Hang in there for this moment. One person who I've had a tremendous amount of admiration for was George Washington. Now, a lot of people remember that he was president of the country and things like that. But I want to remind you of something. It's when he took over as being the general of the American Army during the Revolution. That army was a mess. Several times he had been beaten in battles. Several times he had gotten to a point where just one more day, one more attack by the British against the Americans, it would have ended the American Revolution. And what I want to point out is that wisdom, that perseverance that George Washington had. Not only did he have it for himself, but he also had to have it for others, for his nation that he was trying to build. He didn't even know what the nation was going to look like. But what did Washington do? He hung in there. No matter how bleak, no matter how bad things were going, no matter how hard, no matter how everything was happening and the lack of support that he was getting. And think about that. All that hardship for 7 to 8 years. But if I'm not mistaken, as I recall my history, but the important part about it is what Washington did. He always had one concept, was to basically keep his army together and hang on. Now, let's take a look at that for a moment. In your life, no matter how hard things have been, what's been one of the best things you can do? Yes, I know it's a hard space. Believe me, it's a very hard space. But just keeping things together of what you have and hang on. And keep in mind about that concept. Think about a tree for a second. It's a young tree. And that poor little young tree, it can be blown by the wind and it can be damaged by the storm. And, I mean, even an animal like a deer might chew off every single leaf on it. But so with that young tree, keep in mind, what does it do? And this is something I think that it will really hit home with everybody. It still hangs in there. Right at the second It can't change its situation because for the moment it is stuck. How many times have you seen where that little tree, the perseverance of that little tree, it just keeps on going? I've got a tree like that in my yard. And no matter what it looks like right now and what I would like it to look like, I remember what it looked like before. It's a little apple tree. And that little apple tree, I got to admit, it had been chewed to pieces. The deer just seemed to love it and chew on that wood. And I kept going out there and adding some water to it and trying to put some scents around the tree and different things around it to keep the deer from getting to it. And I would talk with it and I would just remind it, just keep on going. Well, if I look out my living room window, that little tree is about 20 to 25 feet tall now. And guess what? It's got lots of leaves. And every so often, it pops out some apples. So I want to remind you that when life is starting to chew on you and it seems like you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything, just start focusing on what you have. Do your best to hold everything together. A really good piece of advice that I had gotten a long time ago was just to say to yourself, look, I can hold this together for 30 more days. And give yourself 30 days. It doesn't matter what the situation is. Doesn't matter how dark it is. It doesn't matter who you have around you or whatever. Find a way to just try to hold on for another 30 days. And what you're going to find is no matter what, after 30 days, a couple of things will probably have changed for you for the better. And those things that have changed for you, then you can start to hang on to those things as well. Now, let's think about that for a second. Think about your past. Things were pretty tough at points, but you held on. You held on for many years. One of the things to remind yourself is you can change your life. Can you take your life that's really in a hard, terrible space and turn it into something perfect and happy and joyful and everything like that? No, that's not going to happen right away. But what you can do right now is just hang on. And by hanging on, you can start the process of change. I remember one point when I was having such a hard time, I thought that maybe the best thing I can do in that moment is just look up what free things I can do in my city. Uh, One thing to remember is mentally you're going to slow down and you're probably not going to want to take a step outside. You may not even want to talk to anybody. But what I've said in the past, just move your feet. Take that step outside. Go see what's going on outside. When you go to the grocery store, when you get your food, guess what? Go do one more thing that day. Go sit by some water. I remember there's a point when I was really having a tough time and I was out driving a bit. And I decided to just drive over to this lake. It was pretty cold, but what I ended up doing is I just sat there and I just looked out onto that lake. And every so often I saw a little fish that come up to grab something to eat or a bird flying overhead. And I realized that life can go on. And the fact that life can go on means that I can eventually make it a little bit better. One other thing to keep in mind is you've climbed out of this darkness before. You've also got people that you know that are around who've probably climbed out of their own darkness as well. And by climbing out of the darkness, yes, life wasn't exactly perfect when you did it, but it got a little bit better. And eventually, little by little, by just keep making some effort. And that's what I'm trying to say is just keep making an effort. And when you keep making that effort, what ends up happening is things get a little bit better with each day. The sunshine can get a little bit brighter. Maybe your friend ends up checking on you maybe a little bit more often. Maybe one of the best things you can do is just go find somebody who's really having a tough time and go try to help them. And that's something that I found at times when I really felt like I was at the end of my rope. I would just go and try to find somebody to help them a little bit. And by giving that little bit of energy, I actually got some appreciation for my own situation. So let's get to closing this part up a little bit. Like I said, if you're really in a tough spot, tie a knot and hang on. Remember throughout history, there's lots of people who tied that knot and eventually, just by surviving and doing your best to just keeping everything together, just like someone like George Washington, he held himself and our nation together and he persevered. Time can heal those wounds. Time and action will get you through that hardship. Don't forget, by maybe even making the situation okay, it can take some of the sting out of this situation. I have often wondered how George Washington made his day or his week. I wonder how he made it okay. I've often wondered, how did he tie that rope on the end and held on? I have to say, I am thankful that he did. And I'm very thankful we have a country to live in because he tied that knot and he held on. Okay, so this week, we're going to give you a very simple piece of homework. Find somebody who could use your help, who could use just a few minutes of your time, who maybe says everything is okay, but you know it's not okay. Go and be with them. Just hold space for them for a little bit. Maybe cheer them up. Take them up for a cup of tea at a nice little bookstore. Remind them, they can hold on as well. Share your story with them. Tell them a little bit about how you were able to tie that knot and hang on. Because I can say this much from my own life. When I was in that darkest spot, not too long afterwards, was when I really found the love of my life. And since then, life's gotten a good bit better. I want that whatever life you have right now, when you have those dark moments, tie a knot, keep calm, catch your breath, start to take some action and keep on going. Life will move forward for you. I believe in you. See you in the next one.